it was in 1973. That was right in the wake of President Nixon had started the VOLAR, the Volunteer Army. And not surprisingly, the young men did not pour into the military when it was no longer a draft, but the young women did. So the Women's Army Corps was actually a separate army, and a lot of people don't realize that. It had separate assignments branch, separate everything. So when they had a lot of women enlist, they needed to have women officers to manage them. So an unusual situation was set up for a period of time, and I happened to benefit from it. I don't think I appreciated it at the time, but I went down to my recruiting office and I raised my right hand, and I was directly commissioned into the Women's Army Corps. And from there I went to training, whereas at the time the men had to go through OCS, Officer Candidate School, or ROTC or West Point to get a commission. I just went down and raised my right hand, much to the chagrin of my male counterparts at the time. So I went into the Women's Army Corps. I went into training in January of 1974. And just to give you a concept of the view that the Army had of women at the time, we trained at Fort McClellan, and we went out. They took us out on a field exercise that was supposed to give us training out in the field, and they taught us to dig a ditch, or we had to pitch our pup tents, and we had to dig a ditch around the tents in case it rained to siphon off the water. And so we didn't really know how to do that, most of us, but we did it to the best of our ability. And then it poured rain, and our ditches were woefully insufficient. All of us got drenched in our tents because we hadn't done it right. And so in the middle of the night, the Army sent a truck to take us back to the barracks because you couldn't have us getting wet in the rain. I guess I guess they stopped the war for rain, and I guess that's what they were teaching us. So that was my entree into the Women's Army Corps. We were the last class of women to graduate wearing the Women's Army Corps brass. And we were the first class of women to be what was called detailed to other branches. So I was detailed to the Adjutant General branch, and we were in the first class of women officers to be trained in the Adjutant General school for the basic branch program. And that was quite a shock to the men at the time. They thought we were there for other reasons than to become branch qualified, the same as they were, and so we had to correct their thinking on that. I then stayed in the Adjutant General Corps. The Women's Army Corps merged with the Army in, I believe, about 1978, and then I stayed in the Army Reserves for a total of 28 years. Most of my career, I was a public affairs officer, and I finished up my career, actually the last 12 years of my career, I was assigned as a reserve officer to the Army Public Affairs Office in the Pentagon. That's where I was assigned when 9/11 happened, and the plane on 9/11, I was not on active duty on 9/11, but I was in the reserves, and in fact I lived here in Sarasota at the time, and I was in Sarasota at the time, but the plane that hit the Pentagon took out parts of the public affairs office, and so it was very personal for me, as it was for so many others. I also lost a young cousin in the World Trade Center that day. And so I called up the Army Reserves and personnel office on the day after, and I said, I really want to serve, please put me on active duty. And I said, I'll go wherever I need to go, I just want to serve. And the Army, being the Army, said to me, Well, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel, for calling. That was very nice of you to volunteer. We were about to call you anyway, but thank you for volunteering. So that's kind of my story.